Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the beautiful lands and waters of the Islands Trust area have been home to Indigenous peoples since time immemorial, and that their deep connection to these islands continues to this day. As an uninvited guest on these territories, I acknowledge the great responsibility that we all have in learning to care for these lands and waters in what is truly one of the most special places in the world. My name's Chloe Straw, and I'm the program coordinator of the Island Trust's Stewardship Education Program. I want to thank each of you for joining us this evening, and I know we'll have people trickling in as we move along here. Um, Tonight, we are having our second webinar in this year's Stewardship Education Series, Protecting Species at Risk on Your Property, How to Become a Habitat Steward. I'm very grateful to our speakers this evening for the important work that they're doing to raise awareness and protect these beautiful lands that many of us get to call home. Erica Wheeler is a botanist, biologist, and the coordinator of Islands Trust Conservancy's Species at Risk program. And Lou Skinner is an educator, former interpretive naturalist with the Canadian Park Service, and the coordinator of the Nature Stewards program with the Gabriel Land and Trails Trust. And now, just before we hear from Erica and Lou, I wanted to share a few housekeeping items before we get started with the official presentation. Due to the large number of attendees tonight, only the presenters will be able to speak during the webinar. We very much want to hear your comments and questions, though, so please go ahead and type those into the chat. My colleague Morgana, our communications specialist here at the Islands Trust, is joining us this evening, and she and I will be monitoring the chat closely and passing your questions along to the presenters when we get to the Q&A session following the presentations. We'll also be recording this webinar so that we can make it available on our Stewardship Education webpage within the coming days, and it'll be live on our Islands Trust YouTube channel. So please feel free to tell your neighbors and friends who maybe aren't able to join us tonight that they can have an opportunity to take part in tonight's learning as well. So with no further ado, I will pass it to you over to you, Erica.
Thanks, Chloe. Can everybody hear me? And can you see my slides? You can. Great. Really happy to be here. Thanks for the introduction, Chloe. Um, as Chloe mentioned, my name is Erica Wheeler, and I'm the Species at Risk Program Coordinator for the Islands Trust Conservancy. Most of my work is administrative, although I am a biologist, so I have some background at Species at Risk. The Species at Risk program is funded by Environment and Climate Change Canada. And the work that we've done over the last 6 years that we've focused on in ITC protected areas is on surveys and monitoring to understand where species at risk are in ITC protected areas. We've done a lot of habitat enhancement, which has especially included invasive species removal. We've also been focusing on data collection and collation and accessibility. So bringing together all the information that we have about species at risk and making sure they're available to us as part of our conservation planning in the future. We've also been doing some education and outreach. So for programs like this to make sure we hear from people about what they're interested in species at risk and to let you know some of the tools that are available to you to help protect them on your property. So super excited to be here with Lou tonight, who's going to focus on an interesting particular program, stewardship program. My part of the presentation will be more about the big picture of species at risk in Island Trust area. So let me tell you first a little bit about what the Islands Trust Conservancy does, if you're not familiar with us. So we are a land conservancy embedded within the Islands Trust, and we're one of the main and most direct tools that the Islands Trust has for preserving and protecting biodiversity and special places, including species at risk in the Islands Trust area. So we work with people and communities to create nature reserves and conservation covenants that protect special places across the Islands Trust area. Across the Islands Trust, we currently have 34 nature reserves and 81 conservation covenants, which together protect over 1,400 hectares for species at risk and other values, and people too. We don't do this work on our own, of course. We do it in partnership with our conservation colleagues, including most of I think all of the local conservancies that you may see listed here. You may see your favorite island conservancy listed here. We work with them very closely to do things like monitor our covenants, doing the actual work of species at risk monitoring and invasive species control. So that's the list on the left, and on the right, we have some other partners that have broader mandates, including areas outside of the Islands Trust area. I'd like to start by letting you know that you live in a very special place in Canada. In fact, the Government of Canada has identified 12 priority places across the country for funding and action to protect species at risk. So what you're seeing here is a map that I'm sorry, it's a little hard to read, but you can see hopefully 12 numbers across Canada showing places where priority places for species at risk grant money is in operation currently, including the program that I administer with Islands Trust Conservancy. And each of these is focusing on efforts to protect, but also to support the recovery of species at risk. Here's a bit of a close-up on Southwest BC priority places. And the pink background is the area that's included. And it was considered an important place for species at risk for a bunch of reasons. Very high biodiversity compared to other places in Canada. Also, very high number of species at risk. And you don't have to ask very many questions of yourself when you look at that map to see why there may be impacts of species at risk in this area. It's a place where people love to live. So that's one of the main reasons why there are so many species at risk. There's a high opportunity for positive change in this area and in the Islands Trust area in particular. And that's partly because the Islands Trust has, under the Act, has a preserve and protect mandate. And there's a very active and nature valued citizenry to a lot of extent. So Environment and Climate Change Canada saw this as a great opportunity to see how we could move the needle forward with species at risk with this program. The little pink dots are each of the programs that are running, have been running for between 4 and 6 years. Ours, I think, is located in Victoria because that's where our office is. So tonight I'm going to give you a brief rundown of what a species at risk is, if you're not sure. There are many ways to define it. There are ways in legislation to define it, and there's also just colloquial ways to define it. So I'll give you a couple of definitions. I'll show you a few species at risk that are in the trust area, and I'm focusing on ones that give you a sense of the stewardship responsibility that we have. So it's not an exhaustive list. I haven't even included every one of the sort of main groups of plants and animals and otherwise, but I wanted to give you a sense of why our place is important in Canada, as well as just that it's a place that we love. I'll give you a little bit of an idea of who's responsible for protecting species at risk in the trust area, and that's a complex question. Most conservation questions are. Especially in an area like ours, which is there's a lot of pressure from people who want to live in this beautiful place. I'll tell you a little bit about some ideas for things that you can do to help. And I don't have the resources on a slide anymore. Actually, I think Chloe's going to share that with you later. Okay, so um, one request I have from you is if you see a species at risk that I'm talking about briefly, I'm going to talk about each of them briefly, and you've had an experience with them, or you know something about them, or you've seen them where you live, please put it in the chat and we'll record that and we can have a conversation about that. I'm interested in what you know. You, as people who live in the trust area, are the eyes and the ears on the ground. So things that you learn about are really important to share. So let's start that conversation. Okay, so very broadly, species at risk are organisms, so plants and animals, and of course, algae and lichens, um, organisms that are likely to disappear from the place that they live or from the planet if humans don't do something about it. So if we don't do something to help them, we're likely to lose them, either to lose them from Islands Trust area, from BC, from Canada, or from the planet. These concepts are entrenched in Canada under the Species at Risk Act, and this is in place to try to ensure that species at risk do not disappear. And there is a lot of different actions that are required by the federal government and partners in order to plan for the recovery of species at risk. Um, so under the Federal Species at Risk Act, there are four categories of species at risk. Extirpated refers to species that no longer exist in the wild in Canada. So very sad story if that happens, that we lose something in Canada, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's extinct. There are a lot of species that we have in British Columbia, for instance, that occur also in Washington and Oregon. So we still have the responsibility. We still have the stewardship responsibility to make sure they don't disappear from Canada, but extirpated means that no longer exists in the wild in Canada. Endangered, and each of these things is codified in legislation, each of these definitions. So they're not just a wishy-washy, they have some very strong legislation around them and a big, long process of many committees before something can be declared to be endangered or threatened or special concern. So endangered means it's facing imminent extinction, either completely from the wild or extirpation from its Canada, for example. Threatened, likely to become endangered if nothing is done. Something I always want people to understand is that a species of special concern, which may become threatened or endangered due to biological characteristics or threats, these are the ones that are still doing pretty good, but we're concerned. The endangered and threatened species, we have to work really, really hard, and it's often a rescue mission. So the southern resident killer whales may be a good example that you're aware of. There's a lot of work being done at different levels of government and across different organizations to try to make sure that the southern resident killer whales survive. Um, that's a really dire situation. So species of special concern um, are the ones that are they're in a way the most hopeful to work on because we have a chance of making sure they don't disappear and that they don't become threatened or endangered. So there's another way for species at risk to be classified depending on the jurisdiction. So in British Columbia, for example, the province designates species as red or blue or yellow, and under a kind of a simplified federal system. I'm just going to tell you about the red and blue lists because those are the ones for species at risk. And you've probably heard maybe more about these than the federal listings if you're familiar with species at risk in BC. So the red list kind of combines the most dire situations, so extirpated, endangered, or threatened. So all those descriptions that were in the federal slide for the first three are under red listed species. Blue listed again is of special concern. So these are species that are perhaps still viable. We still need to pay attention. We still need to make sure that they're not being impacted, but there's lots of hope. So for example, this pretty little Clarkia is on the provincial red list, but is not currently listed by the federal government. So it's not on listed by the Species at Risk Act. So this table shows the total number of red and blue listed species in the trust area, broken down by the class of organism. So the class of organism, it's flowering plants through to Malacostraccans, which I needed to learn. Depending on how you count, and this is a list that I'm happy to go over how I filtered out to get 217 species. It can be very difficult to figure out exactly what number, how you want to count. You can count in different ways. So overall, there are 96 blue listed species, so special concern, and 121 red listed species. So those are ones that we are more concerned about. So for a total of 217 across the Islands Trust area. As you can see by looking at the top, I've sorted this by the highest number. So we have a very high number, 58 species of flowering plants in the eudicots. So that's used to be called dicots. Now they're called eudicots. So that's things that are not grasses and sedges and lilies. So things like what can I think of? Oh, like the Clarkia. So birds are very high, as well as insects. Mammals are pretty high as well. Fishes and gastropods, and then there's kind of a smattering. So I just wanted to give you a sense of the bigger picture. And again, we can count in a bunch of different ways. So I thought I would go through a few species that you may be familiar with or maybe not. I think I've only got about 8 here, so it's not a big list. But I've chosen these because there's all slightly different examples of the distribution of species at risk in the trust area and where else those exist in Canada or beyond, and then what that tells us about our stewardship responsibility. So this example of an amphibian, the northern red-legged frog, is on the BC Blue List, and it's also on the SARA, so that's the species at risk federal list for special concern. Um, so some people who I've talked to have found that they think this is a very, very common species. They find egg masses in the spring all the time. Like most amphibians, they require water for their the first part of their life cycles and then later for breeding. And as you can see from the map, it's very dense. This is from the Conservation Data Center, so these are very high quality data points, saying that there's definitely probably a breeding population on each of those dots. You can see it's quite dense, and I don't think I can. I might be able to zoom in later and show you where those show up. So even though they may seem really common, the thing is they don't occur anywhere else in Canada. So we have a really high stewardship responsibility for them, even though they feel kind of common to us. They are listed by SARA because they occur nowhere else in Canada. So that's one example of a distribution. So another amphibian, kind of for a little bit of a different story, is the coastal tailed frog. And I'm really happy to say that we are working with some of our partners on Gambier Island to use a special environmental DNA test. So we actually take water from the stream, and then we can use special technique to look for DNA sequencing from the coastal tail frog, and that's a way of detecting a frog without actually having to see a frog. So that's really cool. So in BC, it's yellow, and I didn't talk much about yellow except to say that's not of concern at all. It's considered very secure. And you can see, hopefully, all those green dots, and then also the pink outline. The pink outline is the range. The green dots are the actual populations. Um, each of those dots, as you can see, it doesn't occur in most of the Vancouver Island side of the trust area. It occurs over on the mainland side in Gambier Island for sure, and more of that ecosystem. Um, yeah, so that's also the case where this is the only place that it occurs, only place that it occurs in Canada, and so we have a really high responsibility within the island's trust itself, even to make sure that those populations stay stable. This is an interesting one. We have a very cool snake in our midst, the sharp-tailed snake. A great picture here. So this is an interesting one because it has been split into two populations, not necessarily two subspecies, but two populations, and they're being dealt with separately for their ranking. So it used to be on the BC list, it was red, but it's under review now. There's another process where the ranking goes to the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada, and that process is considered, sorry, the Pacific Coast population threatened, and the Species at Risk Act, there's a decision pending. So this is an example of the snakes are still there doing exactly the thing that they've always done, but there's a bunch of machinations about how do we best manage these and do we put all of our energy into the entire population, or do we separate them and say this one's doing well and this one's not doing well, so we focus on the ones that are doing well. So in the map here, you can see the Pacific Coast population is the population that is in the Islands Trust area. And we're finding with the work that we're doing with our species at risk biologists through the species at risk program, we're finding more and more um, species, sharp-tailed snake populations. And that's adding to information that the federal government has. It's adding especially information to a layer of information called critical habitat, which is a federally protected habitat. It's habitat that a species needs to survive. So under the Species at Risk Act, critical habitat is protected. And we're contributing to expanding that map. Here's one that is probably pretty familiar to you all. Great blue heron, which we all love to see. Pretty common to see them. I live in Victoria and I see them all the time going across the trestle over the gorge. In BC, it's listed as blue. It's also listed as a species at risk federally as special concern. And again, that's because most of these populations, most of this species occurs um, on the coast. So we have a very high stewardship responsibility. One thing that you can do if you ever see great blue herons nesting is to make sure you record that information and provide it to us. My email will be provided and we'll make sure that that information, if it's not already recorded, gets to the right people. Common nighthawk is one that you may have, if not seen, you may have heard. So this is an insectivore that is on the wing, feeds on the wing and feeds on insects at night. It's blue listed in BC and a special concern across Canada. If you look at the range, you can see that it's got a very wide range. So not a narrow range like a lot of the other ones that we've been looking at. So this is a slightly different example. This is a species that we don't actually know enough about it to know for sure that it's secure. What we do know is that insect populations are plummeting, and there's a lot of habitat that is being disturbed. These are ground nesters. And so this species is blue and special concern, at least partly to be conservative about what we know. These guys you might hear at night flying. I'd love to hear if anybody's been hearing those guys. Okay, let's switch from animals to plants. This is one that folks on Gabriola will probably recognize. This is a flowering plant in the class Eudicots, bog bird's foot trefoil, which is a bit of a mouthful. Very pretty plant. And as you can see from the map, there's hardly any populations in our area or in Vancouver Island. Those, in fact, are the only populations in Canada. So there are, I can't remember the count, it looks like 5 populations. One of them is on Gabriola. So it's red listed by the province. Species at Risk Act has it endangered. It's one of these, we're kind of on a rescue mission. So some of the other populations are on the island near Nanaimo and Harewood Plains. This is one that needs, it sort of lives in areas where there can also be things like farms. So nice wet soil. I think the one on Gabriola is in a ditch. Be interested to hear if anybody has seen this anywhere else on Gabriola. Another flowering plant, and it happens to be one of my favorites, is a slim leaf onion. This species occurs all the way down into California, but it's blue listed in BC. It's not considered at risk by the Species at Risk Act. And I wanted to mention that partly because just because something's not listed now doesn't mean it won't be. There's a big, long process to get things listed. This one, I don't think it's on anybody's list of things to put forward because it occurs on rocky outcrops, so it's often, not always, but sometimes protected even when there's a development. This is one that people could keep an eye out. It definitely occurs quite a bit in the trust area. Interesting story. It's one of these species that has populations that have different numbers of chromosomes. So plants can do crazy things with their chromosomes. Animals can't do quite as many crazy things. There are populations on Vancouver Island that are triploid, so they have 3 copies of chromosomes. And the ones in California, Oregon, and Washington are either triploid or tetraploid. And then the last one I think I have here I wanted to mention is a moss. We don't want to forget the bryophytes. This is a red listed species, endangered in Canada. Again, this is our responsibility for Canada. This is the only places in Canada that it exists. So we are stewards of this biodiversity, even though it may occur in a few places, and we may have seen it in a few places in the trust area or Southern Vancouver Island otherwise. We have the responsibility for stewarding it for the whole country. Okay, so that's the end of the list of species. I hope you have some good notes in there about where you've seen those species. And I wanted to switch just to talk a little bit about the threats to species at risk in the Islands Trust area. And as I mentioned at the top, it's not going to be any surprise probably to you that the biggest threat is habitat degradation or loss caused directly or indirectly by human activity. And in particular, there's a few things that are affecting our habitats. So the land use on private land is a big one. So housing, agriculture, and industry. Those decisions that we make about how we use land in the future will affect how the species that we are stewarding fare. The impact of invasive species is a big one, and I don't have to tell anybody about that, anybody who lives in the trust area. So there's a lot of competition and suppression from invasive plants, broom, tansy, ivy, the list goes on. And of course, especially on some islands, one of my favorite islands is Main Island, is browsing by herbivores, and the hyperabundant deer have really impacted the habitat, which in turn affects the ability of species at risk to survive. Another one is the impact of climate change. So there are, in some cases, increases in pests and disease and also increases in drought. We may not see these happen as fast as some of the other things, but I think as you start to look around and see how the cedars are changing and drying up because of the drought, you can imagine that that's probably also having an effect on other plants that you may not be able to pay as much attention to. So some of the things that we think about a lot is how do we work on all fronts to find a balance between um, living responsibly on the land and also protecting the most vulnerable, protecting species at risk. So one of the questions I ask myself is who's really responsible for this and where can we fill the holes and where can we work? Um, so the federal government is responsible through their legislation, the Species at Risk Act, the Migratory Birds Convention Act, the Fisheries Act, and the Oceans Act. Unfortunately, those acts don't apply a lot to the Islands Trust area, except where there is federal land, and with the Migratory Birds Convention Act. So migratory birds are protected. Um, Over 65% of Islands Trust land base is in private hands. And so that means that private owners and the policies around how we develop private land really have a big impact in the trust area. And the Species at Risk Act, for example, does not apply directly to private land except in kind of extreme circumstances. So we're really looking at stewardship approaches. The provincial government has also some responsibilities, but it's a bit of a it's a bit of a mesh. It's a bit of a there is no standalone species at risk legislation in the province. There has been a couple of efforts to pull that together, but the most recent decision is to proceed without it. So we have a bunch of other acts, as I've noted here, that really speak only in some places and some circumstances. So except in parks and federal land, um, there's not a lot of teeth to any of these in the Islands Trust area. Some of the other responsibility for protecting species at risk in the trust area um, can fall to your local trust councils and to the Islands Trust Council through your through through education, and also through making sure that they understand that you really value species at risk. So there are official community plans as those are being reworked, encourage you to be involved in those for whatever reason you'd like to be involved. But there are a number of tools that your local trustees can use to try to reduce the impact on species at risk habitat. So you'll see this list here, and that also includes bylaws. There are certain bylaws that can be used to also shift how things are done. So be an active member, get to know your trustees, let them know at the cafe what you think, go to the meetings, have a presence there. The other way that we can protect species at risk in the Islands Trust area is through protected areas. And this is a list of all the protected areas currently in the Islands Trust area. So that includes everything from national parks to covenants. So I've sorted it by local trust area, the highest protection on the top. So as you can see, Saturna has 53% of its land base protected. And Main Island and Thetis Island down at the bottom, 9% and 4%. Overall, there's 21% of the land base protected in the Islands Trust area. This is getting there, but you may know that there is an international and a national goal that's been set to try to reach 30% of terrestrial habitats being preserved by 2030. So I know that's a goal of the Main Island Conservancy to try to hit 30% by, I think they're going for 3033. So go Maine. I think we should maybe have a competition actually to see if we can bring up these numbers. So you can see that we're doing more or less well in different parts of the island's trust area. But this is one of the main tools that we have and that you have also. So this is the place where we talk a little bit about how you can help. And since I'm speaking to you from the Conservancy, I'll start by talking about the tools that are available for you as a landowner. The first is to place a covenant on your land to protect natural values in perpetuity, and then your hectares will be added to the protected hectares in that table. Another option is to create a new nature reserve by donating your land, either now or in the future. That's a big ask for most of us, but it's available to people who have that capacity. You can also contribute financially to the establishment of new protected areas. And there are campaigns, not just within our Islands Trust Conservancy, but all around you, of course, to encourage people to financially support those efforts. I'd be happy to speak with anybody. You can send me an email and I can put you in touch with the right person, especially if you're interested in the NAPTEP NAPTEP program, which provides a property tax reduction if you put a covenant on your property. So other ways you can help is certainly by learning more about species at risk in your neighborhood. I'm really interested in hearing what people see and hear, and also in setting up a standard to help you record those observations so that when you submit them to me, they're meaningful for our database. So you can record your observations of species at risk and submit them to the email there. I encourage everybody to volunteer to help manage invasive species in your community. They're not just eyesores, but they are potentially releasing native plants by removing the invasive species that are there. And lastly, and this speaks especially to the next talk, is to become a habitat steward right where you live in your own property, whether you live or whether you own or rent. That's one of the best actions you can do. And I'll stop there and say thank you.
Thank you so much, Erica. We're seeing people share in the Q&A here that there have been sightings of sharp-tailed snakes on Salt Spring Island, nighthawks on Bowen, slim leaf onion on Quadra. So
Awesome.
really nice to hear that folks who are joining us this evening have had the opportunity to view some of these species themselves. And also, I just wanted to give voice to some of the other impacts that folks have mentioned here. So, let's not forget part of being a nature steward is making sure that we get control of our dogs and cats,
Hmm.
making sure they're not, kind of tromping through nesting grounds of various species, hopefully not hunting these beautiful birds that call these places home. And I also thank you to Will, who mentioned that we've missed the Bowen Island Conservancy on our list of partner conservancy organizations there. Obviously, not wanting to leave Bowen out.
Apologies.
I know they do amazing work, including stewarding a very large waterfront conservation area at Cape Rogers Curtis. Um, so thank you so much. I know
Thank you.
that we've already had some questions coming in for you, Erica, but we will kind of park those for now, and I will turn it over to Lou, who is our next presenter. So Lou, you'll have to go ahead and turn your video on,
Oh, yes.
and yes, I think there you are.
There I am. Okay, that's great. Thanks,
Over to
Chloe.
you.
Great. Thanks, Chloe. And thank you, Erica. Today I'm going to speak about the Gabriola Land and Trails Trust's program, which is called Nature Stewards. But I know that it's only one of many stewardship programs in the province and in our area. So we would be interested in knowing if you could put in the chat if you know of programs in your area. Okay, next slide, please. All right. So GALT, which is the Gabriola Land and Trails Trust, began 21 years ago in 2004 because there was a lack of publicly accessible trails and not very many parks. There was only 3 or 4% of protected land on Gabriola. And so our mandate is twofold. It's to conserve areas of environmental importance on Gabriola, and we do that in several different ways. One is we monitor covenants. We donate dollars to purchase parks, and we do a lot of work on invasive species and restoration. We have kind of an unusual mandate in that we also develop a network of sustainable trails. And we have over 80 kilometers of trails on Gabriola. And we have 25 landholders who allow the public to walk on their land. And we call them trail licenses, where we provide liability insurance. Part of GALT's philosophy is that people will conserve what they love. And so getting out on the trails on Gabriola is a really important way for people to connect with nature. So as I said before, we're going to talk about our program. That's only one of many in the province. Gabriola is basically in the mouth of Nanaimo Harbor, and it's about the size of Manhattan. It's about 14 kilometers from one end to the other. The Nature Stewards program is a citizens-based program for our island community, and it seeks to establish a culture of conservation on the island and encourage people, especially newcomers, to become part of the island's ecosystem. By linking areas of native habitat, we hope to provide constant or secure biodiversity on our island. If you drove around Gabriola or cycled, you would think that there was more than 13% of the island in legally protected. But because you see a fair number of forests that landholders have chosen to leave, and there's close to 1,000 acres of federal and provincial land being held for the Snuneymuxw. They're currently undergoing a community planning process to determine land uses on Gabriola. GALT's committed to further developing our relationship with the Snuneymuxw, and we look forward to the time when they have renewed their presence on Gabriola and we're neighbors, and we can learn from their teachings and steward Gabriola's land ecosystems together. Next one. So in about 2019, the board of GALT and its members carried out a 5-year strategic planning process. And we identified that although we were known fairly well for our trail work, we wanted to do more to conserve the ecosystems on Gabriola. And so ironically, the next year, we were approached by a community member, Ken Gurr, about creating a Nature Stewards program. We felt that the population was increasing. We have a high number of very relatively small lots on Gabriola, more than most other Gulf Islands, where we have lots that are 0.3 of an acre or less. And they're getting more and more of them are becoming developed. And often newcomers will come and clear cut the lot. And so there was a lot of anxiety and kind of felt that we were at a tipping point and we needed to do something to try and conserve biodiversity. You can see in this map, this is showing you what was legally protected on Gabriola in 2019 or 2020 when the Nature Stewards program was first talked about. The green are parks and nature reserves, and the orange are publicly accessible covenants. Erica mentioned the NAPTEP covenants, which is the Natural Area Protection Tax Exemption Program covenants. And we have 3 on Gabriola shown with stars. Not all of the stars you see actually are NAPTEP covenants. Some of them are other types of covenants. But that's why we were really excited when Ken Gurr came to us with the idea of starting the Nature Stewards program. I just took over coordinating it from Ken this year. He worked on contract for Galt for the first 3 years to get it up and running. And now I've taken over as a volunteer coordinating the program. The program works in that people can go online and apply to become a nature steward on Gabriola. They might hear about it at the Saturday market, or they might see the signs around Gabriola, and they contact us. Ken spent the first 6 months creating background information resources for and recruiting and training volunteers. We have 11 people who go out to make visits at on properties, and he got a lot of support from groups like Habitat Acquisition Trust in Victoria, and the Okanagan-Similkameen Stewardship Society that has a similar program, and they helped him to develop the background work that was needed, like using a program called Airtable to keep track of our databases. And so what is involved in the program is 2 volunteers go out, visit with the landholder, have a tour, and write a report about the land. And if the person is interested, they can sign a pledge to conserve a certain percentage of their property for a specific length of time. Next slide, please. So here's Ken in the green shirt, sorry. He and I did one of the first Nature Stewards visit to Linda and Peter Hellenius's property. And the kinds of things that the visit allows is we like people to learn about the ecosystems on the land, to identify native and invasive plants, and also to articulate their goals for the land, whether that be that they want to leave it as it is, or perhaps they need to clear a small portion for a garage, or perhaps they're planning to fire smart their property. And then we also help to give them ideas for things they can do to conserve their habitat, or in fact enhance it in some ways. Okay, next slide, please. If the property has at least 30% of habitat that the landholder would like to conserve, they have sign a pledge, and they receive this sign saying we're conserving native habitat. This is one of our newest nature steward people. If it's a smaller lot, it's not always possible to have 30% of native habitat. I know when we purchased our property, there were very few plants on it at all. There was a lot of lawn. And so some people just don't have enough native habitat to qualify to be a nature steward, but perhaps they're stewarding their land in a way that is encouraging wildlife and encouraging biodiversity, and perhaps they're doing restoration so they can become a wildlife-friendly garden. One of the things that we do on the island, or what we have done twice, is something called the Tour de Terre, which was basically an open nature steward day where we had about 6 or 7 properties that members of the public could go on to see what the native habitat was like, and how people were stewarding it. One of the more popular spots was a place where the landholder had discovered a recipe basically to get moss to grow on rocks that the previous owner had sprayed, cleared off. And so it's a good way for people to get a chance to get ideas. Next one. So this is now, these are our current numbers. When we started, there was 12% of formerly protected land on Gabriola, and it's gone up to 13%, not because of the Nature Steward program, but because the regional district in Nanaimo was able to add some land to the 707 Community Park, which you can see there in the center of the island. But all of these turquoise little dots and squares and odd shapes are nature steward properties where the landholders are conserving at least 30% of the property and sometimes up to 60 or 75%. And so as of now, we have 374 acres voluntarily conserved. They aren't connected to the title of the property at all. It's not a legal document. People could choose to stop at any time, but we are hoping that they will continue on and that if they sell the land, that they will pass the information along to the new person so that those people will understand the importance that we place on conservation on Gabriola. Okay, you can see that some of our, oh, sorry, can you go back just for a sec, please, Chloe? We sometimes target particular properties that are close to parks and spaces where there is already a lot of native habitat so that we can have contiguous areas of habitat. Thanks. Galt has a very active invasives committee, which is now switching its name or shortly to habitat restoration. And they put out this brochure that you can see to encourage people to deal with invasive plants on their property. We don't deal with invasive animals. One of the more popular invasive animals on the island are turkeys. We have a pretty big feral turkey population. And heaven help us if we suggested we'd be dealing with those. But you can see the priority invasives that we deal with that are probably really familiar to many people in the Islands Trust area. And the Invasives Committee put out this brochure. We kind of followed the idea of the Coastal Invasive Species Committee in terms of breaking plants into categories like eradicate, contain, and control. So there are 3 species we would really like to keep off Gabriola. They are here to some extent, but not a lot. And that's giant hogweed, knotweeds, and gorse. We used to be able to carry out broom bashes on the roadsides, but we found that we just don't have the volunteer capacity to do that. And so our volunteer committee is basically doing invasives removal in parks and other places of ecological significance. And so we gave this brochure to all of Gabriolans and hoping that they will deal with them in their neighborhood. So we have a real push around Earth Day to encourage people to manage invasives in their neighborhood. Okay, next one, please. Okay, learning about sensitive ecosystems is actually a fairly big learning step for our committee as well. And in fact, we're having an in-service in the next week to help us really feel comfortable in identifying these sensitive ecosystems. There's a really good handbook that you can see there, a sensitive ecosystem guide put out by Islands Trust. I think not the Conservancy, but Islands Trust about these ecosystems. Before there was a lot of human population, there was a real mosaic of landscapes in the Islands Trust area, but now there are fragments of ecosystems that are strongholds for native species. And so these are I can't count quickly, but something like 8 sensitive ecosystems that the Islands Trust has identified. And so when we go out to a landholder's property, we try to identify if any of these sensitive ecosystems are on the land. And in fact, an 8-acre parcel that I went to recently had 4 different sensitive ecosystems on it, including woodland, cliff, mature forest, and riparian area. They're often close to each other. They link up to each other. The first woodland area there is actually the photograph to the right, where you can see some Gary oak trees. And the woodland area is usually dry and open forest. That's a mixture of coniferous and deciduous trees. Often Gary oaks and arbutus, as well as Douglas fir, are there. And so on Gabriola, we believe that it's the kind of habitat where we might have screech owls, slimleaf onion, and McCoon's meadow foam, which is a very small ground cover type plant that is actually growing in one of our provincial parks. And so one way to try and protect the woodland ecosystem is to limit access and livestock grazing. So if you have someone that's thinking of bringing on sheep or some other type of farm animal, we encourage them not to let them graze in that area because it compacts the soil and damages the vegetation. The next sensitive ecosystem is pretty self-explanatory. It's cliffs. I think only 1% of the Islands Trust area has cliffs, but we have quite a few on Gabriola, it feels. They're steep slopes with little soil, and they provide good protection from predators. And so some species nest there, some species will live in the crevices or maybe overwinter there. And so it's good habitat for double-breasted cormorants and peregrine falcons. The one way to be careful about this cliff ecosystem is to prevent disturbance, especially from March to August when birds are nesting, and having a buffer across the top of it to prevent people from getting close is a good idea as well. There are 3 aquatic types of ecosystems. There's the wetland, which is marshes, bogs, swamps, and standing water. Could have red-legged frogs, great blue herons, Arctic rush, trumpeter swans. And one important thing to do would be to try and control invasive species like yellow flag iris. Yellow flag iris can propagate through rhizomes, and it's really tough if you try and pull them out. And if a piece breaks off, then the rhizome will just float along and start a new plant somewhere else. But it also propagates through flower heads. So if you can get out there in a canoe and cut off the flower heads before the seeds disperse on the water, that would be really helpful. Herbaceous areas, like the photo that you can see with the sea blush blooming, are grasslands or open meadow, or on sparsely vegetated hilltops, which you can see in a lot of the parks in the Gulf Islands. It has shallow soil and could also be a home for slimleaf onions and a species of dusky wing butterfly. Try and limit access and control invasives there. Freshwater refers to primarily lakes and ponds deeper than 2 meters, and they're good spots for red-legged frogs. So you could restrict pesticide use or fertilizer and manure use close to the fresh water to decrease algae blooms. Riparian refers to the edges of water bodies. And on Gabriola, we do have bog bird's foot trefoil or Husakia pinnata growing. And I think it's hard to tell because it's quite dense habitat, but I think it's starting in a riparian area on a property and growing into the ditch. Our challenge is to ensure that when the mowing is done by the road maintenance crew on Gabriola, that they don't mow in that area when it's blooming in the springtime. Okay, old forest and mature forest. We don't have a lot of old forest on Gabriola where trees are older than 250 years. And normally coniferous trees dominate, but it would be good potential habitat for marbled murrelets, which we've seen off the coast of Orla Bar Point on Gabriola, but I don't know if they're nesting here. Unlikely, but I don't know. And red-legged frogs. We do see a lot of red-legged frogs on Gabriola, as Erica was saying. They seem kind of common locally. The mature forest is more what we have here, and that's forests that are 80 to 250 years old, where you might have great blue herons nesting, screech owls, banded pigeons, and red-legged frogs. So if we can go to the next one. So when our nature stewards are going out to properties, we are talking with landholders about how to try and maintain a healthy forest, because healthy forests can really help to protect our lands against wildfires. So a healthy forest has tree canopy with some standing dead trees. And we encourage people, if they have to cut down a tree because of safety reasons, that they leave a snag of 10 meters that woodpeckers can use, as well as many insects and mosses and lichens. A diverse and healthy understory with shrubs and mosses and herbs is a sign of a healthy forest. And on Gabriola, we have a lot of red and evergreen huckleberries, sword ferns, Oregon grape, salal. Those are all typical of our forest. And coarse, woody habitat is really important. Fallen logs, stumps, large branches, etc. Those all contribute to improving the soil in the forest and also maintaining soil moisture. It can be a challenge when people are really concerned about fire and have undergone fire smarting. Sometimes you see some people who are almost sweeping their forest floors, but you need to keep some of this stuff there to create that healthy forest floor. Some people on Gabe and other places, if they have a lot of, if they've done, say, some laddering where you cut off the branches up 10 feet up a tree to try and stop forest fires, sometimes they will be able to remove the smaller branches and make berms out of some of the logs. And they keep them in contact with the soil and maybe place them in an opening area where they'll get rained on, and put on deciduous leaves to keep the piles moist is one way to go. Next slide, please. Okay, the riparian area. So that's along the edges of creeks and other water bodies. Galt had a project funded by the Regional District of Nanaimo Watersheds Program to do some riparian work on 2 creeks on Gabriola. And this is Ken Gurr, who started the Nature Stewards Program. And he did some education and produced some information for landholders living on Castell Creek and Goodhue Creek on Gabriola. And so he met with over 100, well, I think it was 88 properties and over 130 residents about how to care for riparian areas, to keep them healthy and to keep the water healthy or clear as well. And so he had a project, we had a project where this is Goodhue Creek, and it runs through the Gabriola Golf Course. And so he planted over 90 shrubs and other plants to provide shade to the water. And it also provides habitat for critters in the creeks as well. And it prevents soil erosion and runoff, which was a bit of an issue on the golf course during atmospheric rivers. A recommendation is to avoid removing stumps and dead trees if you have a riparian area, because it creates habitat for aquatic life, and it stabilizes the banks and provides nutrients into the creek. Remove invasives, as we talked about before with the yellow flag iris. And if the edges of the stream are getting degraded, limit access and plant native plants along there. The types of plants that were planted at the golf course were coastal mock orange, currants, dogwood, willow, sedges and rushes, and sword ferns. Next one. So we encourage people to plant native species because they evolved here and they support native biodiversity. They provide food and habitat. And so when I say what species, I'm a big fan of getting to know what's already out in the forest or whatever ecosystem you live by or in. Spend a lot of time out there. Look to see what's growing. If you have cedars, look what's growing under cedars in the forest. Maybe that's Oregon grape and sword ferns. And so you can use tools like iNaturalist to identify what's already out there, or of course, some of the well-known books as well. One thing I noticed when I was looking in the forest is that red huckleberries often grow on nursery logs, or rotting wood. And so when I plant those on my property, I put in rotting wood with them to try and give them the moisture that they need. Back in 2020, Galt invited Dr. Richard Hebda to come and speak at our annual general meeting about the impact of climate change on the Southern Gulf Islands. Dr. Hebda was a longtime curator at the Royal BC Museum, and he currently still teaches at UVic. And he talked to us about some of the ecosystems and plants that he thought would fare well during or as a result of climate change. We all know that cedars and grand fir are suffering, but he felt that it sounds to me like it's the species in the woodland sensitive ecosystems. So things like arbutus and Gary oak should fare okay. And he suggested planting for climate change: camas, Nootka rose, ocean spray, thimbleberry, osoberry, fawn lily, nodding onion, stonecrop, woolly sunflowers. And so it gave us some hope about what we could be planting. I really recommend Habitat Acquisition Trust brochure called Gardening with Native Plants. It's a great resource when you're trying to choose native plants. It has a chart in the center that tells you many things about the plant, what kind of soil it needs, sun or shade, how high it will become when it blooms, what other plants grow well with it. And so it's just an invaluable resource, and it's on their resource page. Okay, next one. So we recommend planting in the wet season. Like right now is a great time to be planting, or even, in December. Of course, you need to put the right plant in the right place. So you got to check the required conditions, and you need to baby it for the first year. Many native plants will be able to adapt to not needing a lot of water, but that first year they need it. And so you have to take care of them. This is an image from Drumbeg Provincial Park at the southeast end of the island, and this was taken maybe 3 weeks ago. We over the course of decades, it feels, but in this area in particular, in the last 5 years, we've removed a lot of Scotch broom. And when we removed it, there was bare soil because it was so dense that nothing was growing. So we have a restoration project funded through the BC Parks Enhancement Fund to plant plugs primarily of many different species. And if you're interested, you can see what we're planting on our website. And we were lucky to have some of the grade 7 kids on Gabriola help with the planting. Those pink flags represent native plants that we have either grown from seed or planted as plugs in the previous years. So our goal is to try and create a Gary oak ecosystem there. Okay, and another thing is, back for a sec, please, is to watch for and nurture volunteer plants. It is amazing if you wait and see what comes up on your property, and just pay attention to what's there. And on my little 0.3 of an acre on our land here, we have had so many volunteers, probably 15 or 16 different species of plants have come up, including rattlesnake plantain, Nuttall's toothwort, arbutus, Douglas fir, cedar, shore pine, Saskatoon, thimbleberry, red flowering currants, Nootka roses, bald hip roses, and bracken ferns, which I know drive some people crazy because they can become so dense. But in fact, I find that they provide shade for some of the more sensitive plants that are trying to grow there as well. Next slide. If you go to the Gabriola Land and Trails Trust Facebook page, you will see a tab saying Reels. And if you click on that, you'll be able to see 3 nature stewards in action. There are videos that are about 8 minutes long. One is a small lot. In fact, it's my small lot, our property. And then there's the Broccoli's Native Plant Garden. They have a 5-acre property. And when they built the house, I think it was around 2012, the land around it was barren because of the clearing that was done. Although they only took, I think, 20 trees out of a 5-acre lot. It looked pretty rough. And so they they decided where they wanted trails, and then they waited. And I think within a few years, native plants were volunteering there. And they have over 60 species of native plants, and 80% of them volunteered there. So you have a chance to see that on this video. And incidentally, Rob and Susan told me they only spent about $200 on landscaping, and it's an amazing area. Okay, next. The Gabriola Land and Trails Trust wanted to make use, should I say, of the native plants that were being lost when landholders were developing property. And so we developed, in the same year we started a nature steward program, we developed the Native Plant Depot and Recovery Team. This is the recovery team in action. We reached out to landholders and construction firms to invite us onto properties before clearing started so that we could harvest native plants. And then we took those native plants to a small native plant depot at the Gabriola Commons, and people can go and take plants for free. We don't charge for them because there's no guarantee that they will transplant well. You can see here we had pretty good number of plants harvested. This is land that in the last year has been developed for Gabriola's affordable housing complex. They invited us to come 4 times to do native plant recovery before the contractors came in. We're having a bit of a tough time getting other construction firms or excavating firms to invite us, or property holders to invite us to come before development starts. So it's something we're still working on. But we also encourage islanders who have maybe volunteer plants coming up where they really don't want them to dig them up, pot them up, and take them to our native plant depot. And we're hoping that in the future we will be able to propagate plants and make them available to islanders for restoration. Next. So this last section is about some ideas that you can do that are human-made features. And the first is property boundaries. It's kind of common sometimes for newcomers to the island, knowing that there are a lot of deer, perhaps they'll put up a solid wood fence. But we're encouraging people to have a more open fence. Here you can see it's like a split rail fence, and then with metal mesh above it to keep the deer out of their area. Deer are also a problem on Gabriola in terms of overbrowsing. And so one of the other things you can do is not have a fence at all. It happened that some panels of our fence basically fell over, and we decided not to replace them. And so the relatively undeveloped lot next door, some of the native plants from there, like evergreen huckleberry, Oregon grape, moved over into our yard as well. The other thing you can do is reduce the amount of lawn that you have, because it's pretty non-productive in terms of biodiversity. And so you don't need to have as much lawn. You can start restoring edges of it, or you can leave it unmowed. If you leave it mow less around the edges, then plants will start moving into that area as well. Ponds and bird baths are great addition for, especially for birds. It's amazing the diversity of birds that you can get to your bird bath, especially if there's cover nearby for them to be able to hide in. But at our bird bath, we have deer, raccoons, squirrels, and river otters coming to drink water in the summer, or anytime, I suspect. Rock and brush piles are easy things to do to increase the habitat and the cover for creatures. A rock pile close to a pond can be a great hiding spot for amphibians. Insects. I have stacks of rocks around the edges of some of the beds in our area, and I lifted a rock off one day and saw a little garter snake sheltering and sunning under it. Brush piles are great for birds to nest in, or ground nesting birds as well as insects, and leave some bare ground for ground nesting bees and other pollinators. Bird and bat houses. We had a part of our siding had lifted up, and I discovered, because I could see guano, I realized there were bats nesting under it. So I was able to block that and put a bat box there, so that bats are living there. And the last is wind curtains. This is a strategy you can use for stopping birds flying into your windows, because if you have windows on a corner especially, or if they're reflective windows, you get a lot of bird strikes, particularly varied thrush. Our studies show that they have a lot of difficulty with windows. And so wind curtains, you can find the pattern online, but it's basically a 2x2 piece of wood with holes drilled in it, and then cords suspended, and you put them outside your windows, and they'll blow in the wind. And it lets birds know that there's a window there, or that there's something there, not to fly there. Next one. Oh, the last thing is, don't clear your garden until the buds appear in the springtime, because there are a lot of things overwintering there, whether it's butterflies overwintering, or insects, or snakes. So a messy garden is a good garden for biodiversity. These are some of the different resources that we use, that our volunteers especially use when they're going out, and we give some of them to the landholders when we go to visit. I just wanted to point out the Stewardship Center for BC. Actually, the booklet that you can see on the left that talks about building a brush pile or a dry stone wall and rock piles, that's from a resource that they put out, which is down at the bottom. I got it through the Stewardship Center for BC, but it's actually called Caring for Wildlife Habitat at Home, and it's available at that link at the bottom, and it's a really useful book. And I think that's about it. Chloe, I hope we've given you some tips for stewarding habitat.
Thank you so much, Lou. I'm reminded of that quote by, was it Margaret Mead, that never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that has. And I know that you, for years, have been one of those very active citizens on Gabriola Island. So thank you so much for sharing that story of how your community has, you know, gotten organized to really promote this work and help people to do it on their individual properties as well as in their neighborhoods. Um, I want to make sure that we've got some time for questions since we've had some come through in the Q&A. If you haven't had a chance yet, feel free to type your questions into that little icon at the bottom that has a question mark and says Q&A, and I can go ahead and read them out. And so this first one that's come in looks like it's for you, Erica. Where can we get the full list of species at risk so that we can look for them on our land?
Thanks for that question. Um, Chloe, I just forwarded two handbooks to you by email, and I'm not sure if you're able to share those. One of them is one that Lou forwarded to me last week, and I finally opened that email. Thank you, Lou. That looks great. And the other one is from a different source. I think those are both a good start. They're both a little old. Um, You're People are always welcome to email me either at the my name directly or there's also a SAR email, which is just species at risk email, sar@islandstrust.bc.ca. Um, I can help you learn how to search the Conservation Data Center so that you can see where there are records on your island. So you can get in touch with me. There's one of the resources. So yeah, I think it's the South Coast Conservation Program, that one. So 2016. And then I don't think that there is one particularly for Islands Trust area. That's a good point, and it might be time for us to kind of do an update if we look at these two resources and then see how up to date they are. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. And I'll just mention that we will be sending out an email along with the link to the recording of tonight's webinar with the lists that have been shared through the presentation here. And so I'll make sure to add this one to that list.
Great.
The next question here, again, I think this will be for you, Erica. Does Gambier Island have a Nature Stewards program? Do we know of any programs active on Gambier Island?
I don't know the answer to that. I know that there is a conservancy that's very active. Somebody who might be able to let us know is somebody who is over on Bowen. Was it Will who was one of the
On
people
Bowen
answering questions
Island.
on Bowen? Um,
Yeah, I know. We've just had a comment come in. We've got Trustee Fast, one of our trustees for Bowen Island, has joined tonight and has mentioned that Thetis Island has a nature stewards program that was modeled after the one on Gabriola. So great to hear that there's
yeah,
some cross-pollination happening there. Um, well, we might have to get back to that one, and I can follow up and do some research and include that if we do find out that, in fact, Gambier Island does have a nature stewards program. We'll be sure to include a link. Um, Besides great blue heron nests, are there any other species at risk we should be reporting to you, Erica, through the Species at Risk program?
mm, thanks for the question. Yeah, I'm interested in hearing whatever you're observing. Frankly, we don't get a lot of emails. The SAR email's a bit lonely. So I'd be happy to hear from people. My intention over time is to provide a format so that people know what to record, so that when we get data from people, then it's stuff that we can actually pass on to the province if that's appropriate. Um, so once you start to get those handbooks in front of you and get to understand what some of the species at risk are in your neighborhood, I'm happy to hear about anything. Some of them are easier to identify than others. Obviously, heron rookery is great to know about if it hasn't been mapped. Those are the kinds of things that are actually mapped in Islands Trust. And they are part of bylaws on some of the islands in terms of, I think probably all the islands, but I'm not sure about that. That there needs to be a radius of a buffer area that you can't go any closer than a certain area around trees where there are nesting birds, including herons. So, yeah, happy to hear about anything. Um, so please send me an email.
Great, thanks. Here's a question that came from Elsie. Elsie says, I have a large population of painted turtles on our farm. Within the last year, we've had a population boom of stickleback fish. Not sure where they came from. We didn't have them 3 years ago, but there's a lot of them, and I'm noticing less frog activity. So the question is there any concern to the turtles with these fish moving in? Um,
Mm.
Erica or Lou, I wonder if either of you have a response for that one.
Fish and turtles. I
Mhm.
am not a turtle person. I would bet that the turtles would eat it. No, turtles are vegetarians.
Turtles are
Turtles
vegetarian.
are vegetarians. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. Um, I can try to find out if you'd like to send me an email,
Okay. So
unless
Elsie,
Lou, do you
look
know
for
anything?
that
No,
follow-up
sorry.
email with Erica's address, and we'll do some more research on that one.
Yeah.
This one's for you, Lou. Does Gabriela or Galt have an educational newcomer program to provide resources about preserving forests?
Well, I think it was about my second slide. I showed a fairly large brochure about being a nature steward on your island, on your island home, and it does talk. And it was designed specifically for newcomers. It was given, as well as people who'd been here for a while, it was given out to all island homes that had a mailbox. And Islands Trust sends it out to people when they are, I think, Chloe, is it when they are just moving here?
New
Uh,
residents, yeah.
New residents, right? And it does talk about the importance of trying to conserve trees in particular, as well as other things. Part of the problem is, though, that by the time that they've chosen, by the time they get here, perhaps their lot has already been cleared by their contractor. So there was one person who reached out to us before they came to say that they wanted to have a really small footprint and allowed us to go in and harvest native plants before that. But no, we just have that one brochure about conserving trees.
Thank you so much. We've also got a shout out from Bowen Island, wanting to let folks know about the 2025 photo contest that the Bowen Island Conservancy is running, inviting people to turn their cameras onto the natural wonders of the island and share through the Caring for Nature Biodiversity photo contest. You can learn more about that on the Bowen Island Conservancy website. You search for that. Um, with that, I think it's about time to wrap up for this evening. Hard to believe that we're at time already. I want to once again thank both of you, Lou and Erica, for joining us tonight, sharing your expertise, inspiring us with, very concrete actions that we can take both individually as well as on the community and more regional, even federal level. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight and remind you that we will be sending an email for all those who registered containing a link to the recording for tonight's webinar. You'll also be able to find it on our Islands Trust YouTube channel and on the Islands Trust Stewardship Education page. I would be remiss to not give a quick plug for the other series, other webinars coming up in our series for this year. On December 10th, we will be featuring a conversation on shoreline protection as a shared responsibility, learning from some guardians from the Malahat Nation about the clam garden restoration happening there. We will be learning about climate adaptation and nature-based solutions that you can use on your properties, such as how to build a rain garden on February 4th. And on March 4th, we'll be talking about those pesky deer that got referenced a few times tonight. Um, and having several folks who've been very much involved in this conversation and this work on the Southern Gulf Islands talking about what a fallow deer management strategy might look like for the Southern Gulf Islands. So you can find out more about each of those webinars on our stewardship education page and sign up for them. And of course, look for additional resources that we will be sharing on our stewardship education page. Thank you once again so much for joining us, and I hope you have a very peaceful evening. Good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.